Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Southern Outdoorsman Podcast. Today, we got a special Monday episode for you. We're doing a Q&A special, so today we're going to cover a whole bunch of listener Q&A submissions that we have gotten through our website, Spotify, and YouTube comments. We typically do these on Thursdays, but these last couple weeks been a little bit crazy. Haven't been able to get to them, I think, the last 2 weeks now. So we've got a little bit of a back catalog, so we're going to work through some of those right now. Jacob, how are you doing?
Doing real good, real good. Supposedly, I don't know all the questions. I've seen a couple that got submitted, but you said we get some really good ones.
Yeah, we got some great ones.
So I'm really interested in kind of seeing about, how all that lays out. But, by the way, guys, we got some new apparel on the website, okay? I don't know if y'all can tell. This is one of the new shirts we've got. Got a couple different styles, and Andrew's teasing one right now.
Yes.
To come.
To come soon. Yes.
What?
You better be subscribed to our email list. Hoodies. Hoodies, baby. Better be subscribed to the email list. They'll get first dibs.
How do they subscribe?
Go on over to the website, subscribe to Woodsman Wire. That's our email list. It'll give you a pop-up. There's also a page on the website that says Woodsman Wire on it. Or you can hit it in the show notes down below this video or podcast, however you're listening. So
yep,
that's how you do it, man.
Sweet. Well, I guess to kick us off while you're drinking your water, how do we want to get everything started here?
We got a bunch of early season questions, which I'm glad about. By the way, we've been posting a lot of listener success stories. We've been doing listener success segments on the podcast on Thursdays for the first half of the episode. And here lately, towards the last half of August, I've been doing 2 listener success posts per day on our social media accounts because that's how many we had left over from last year. I'm trying to get through them because as we're recording this, it's the Tennessee velvet season. And guys are shooting a bunch of big old deer. Kelsey shot
Kelsey Moss, yeah.
Shot a big one.
He told me the story about it yesterday. It's actually a permission property he got.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Dude, okay. All right. We might have to talk more about that later. But anyways, listener success stories are about to start rolling in for this current season. So, guys, as y'all are going out and shooting some deer, y'all better be sending them in. I talked to a lot of you at trade shows this summer who did not send in their listener success stories, and I got onto them. Mm-hmm. I was like, what are you doing? Come on, man. Yep. Send them in. Send them in. So we love seeing them. I know Georgia's getting ready to open. Kentucky, North Carolina.
South Carolina's been open, at least the southern half.
Yeah, South Carolina. Of course, we got Tennessee Velvet, and probably people are traveling and doing some hunts elsewhere as well.
Yep.
So
your Maryland listeners, they're about to open up. West Virginia opens up late September.
Yep.
Virginia's in that same kind of time frame.
Yeah, and a lot of these questions have to do with early season, which I love. I love talking early season. So yeah, we'll go ahead and kick it off. By the way, we tell people how to do the Q&A submissions?
Well, but also for the listener success story, there's a link down in the show notes, or you can go over to the website, thesouthernoutdoorsman.com. There's a tab on the website to submit your listener success form. You can submit some photos, tell a story about the deer, what you like about the podcast, did anything about the podcast actually apply for that specific hunt, and get that submitted, and we'll go to share those. And then also, we may pick you for a listener success episode because, again, we're kind of recording those for these Thursday episodes, which are really interesting and had some great conversations so far. Also, for the listener Q&As, which we're going to be covering today, there's a link down in the show notes of the audio and video version of this podcast, or again to the website, thesouthernoutdoorsman.com, and there's a tab there, again, listener success form. You can submit your question, and again, we'll answer those on either a format like this, where we do a whole episode on it, or on some of our Thursday episodes when we get a little more time to do it. So, again, appreciate everybody submitting questions. There's been, again, some good ones I've read, along with, especially on YouTube. There's been some interesting ones submitted through YouTube and Patreon.
Yeah, definitely. By the way, do we just want to tease real quick some of the episodes and stuff that we got coming up? This, as this airs, this is my last week at my day job.
I know.
It's over. We're taking a leap, baby. And we're about to take a little road trip. And we're going to do some podcast interviews. It's going to be cool.
Yeah, a lot of in-person stuff. So, I may not tease specific guests because we're still working, double-checking details of it all.
Okay.
But there's going to be some really good ones coming down the pipe. Again, a lot more in-person interviews coming out this fall. So the audio is going to be better. The video podcast is going to be better. Conversation is going to be better because we're able to spend time with these guests. But
yeah, we've
got some serious killers coming on the podcast.
Yes, definitely. So, I'm excited. We've got like 9 lined up already. So anyways, all right, let's do this. This one is from Bryce Curry from North Carolina, which we're about to be in. He said, "Hey guys, love the show. Been listening for about 6 months, and y'all put out some fantastic content that is relatable for people in the Southeast, unlike the guys from the Midwest." Dang.
Just taking shots right off the rip.
This is my first year hunting public land. I've hunted private lands and hunt clubs and got tired of feeling locked into a stand or particular area. And I'm wondering what you guys suggest as far as what to look for and what to stay away from when checking out pieces of public. Most of our public land is small parcels or strips down the edges of lakes and rivers, which doesn't give much room for big landscape or habitat changes. Thanks, guys, for pumping out great content. All right, Jacob, how would you tackle that? What do you look for at a piece of public, or what kind of worries you about a piece of public?
Probably one of the biggest things is, first off, pieces of public especially if it's not very large in size. So I'll say not very large. Like if it's under 5,000 acres, if it's close, to me, that's a smaller piece of public. I know some guys in the Midwest are like, that's a huge chunk, but down here, that's a small chunk, less than 5,000 acres. If it's close to a highly populated area,
yes,
that's number one, in my opinion. If it's close to a high populated area, within 45 minutes to an hour drive, pretty easy drive, that's probably going to have a decent amount of pressure. You can still hunt it, still have great success on a place like that, but you're going to have to get way more creative, more than likely, or have a flexible work schedule where you can hunt more during the week than the average guy going out there on a maybe Friday afternoon, hunting Saturday, maybe hunting Sunday.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a good point. The populated area thing. So, next to a big city, that's going to cause hunting pressure. When it comes to buck quality, it depends on what you're looking for. If you're trying to find a place that's got really good deer on it, then obviously look for places that have antler restrictions on them, I would say. That's going to help out with buck quality.
Another one, which, because I've been looking at this maybe a little bit in Georgia, not going this year, but maybe next year, who knows. Looking at, especially if the state does a really good job about kind of showing and showcasing quality of bucks in different counties and like county records. Like Georgia does that. Georgia does like county records and all that kind of stuff. Looking what counties are constantly kind of popping up in that record book. A lot of those are coming from private. But if there's public in those counties, there's something going on in those counties potentially that's allowing for whether better age class and or better nutrition to grow bigger deer. Not necessarily a genetic thing, more so about the nutrition and the quality of what the hunting is going to be like. So that's something, again, if you're looking for quality of deer, kind of looking through your state. Like I don't know what they do in North Carolina, if there's really much of a documentation of quality of bucks, but this is just something to think about. I mean, I know some guys in North Carolina that kill some giant deer. A lot of them are doing a little bit more like the urban bow hunting, suburban bow hunting kind of stuff. Where it's legal and they're killing gigantic deer. But again, that's like a big factor. Also, one other thing to look at, if that's kind of like not necessarily a red flag, but something to consider, is if it's a piece of public that maybe, again, I'm not so worried about this with a big chunk, again, over 5,000 acres, but when it's 5,000 acres or less, if there's a lot of roads and a lot of open roads that you can drive on the place that aren't gated, that's one of those things that you're going to have to get creative, because a lot of times you don't have to go always a mile back on public to go find, quality deer. Sometimes you can find them within a couple hundred yards of the road, but you have to be a lot more creative on areas that have a lot more road access than areas that it's slightly more restricted. As in, there's maybe a couple different ways to get into the property, and then you got to walk back and hike in. The ones with a lot more roads, to me, you got to be a little more, strategic on where you hunt, and especially if you can get and hunt, if there's a lot of roads, off one of those roads, again, a couple hundred yards where there's not a good parking area and you got to park way further down because the road's real tight. That's something to kind of look for in that circumstance. But again, a lot of open road systems, to me, makes it a little more tough, just because people can ride roads and they can kind of park just about anywhere instead of having more designated areas with a lot more ground behind it that you can kind of get a little more, creative on access.
All right, let's nail this down a little bit more and be more specific about the particular situation that he's talking about. So where maybe it's more than 5,000 acres, but it's on like a lake or a river system, and it's broken up into small chunks up and down that river system. When it comes to scouting something like that, which we've hunted stuff like that in the past, and we have good buddies who that's almost like they hunt that a lot. Guys who've been on the podcast before. What would you say would be good to look for in that? Like, again, getting back to what he was saying here, where it doesn't lend itself to like big landscape, big habitat changes because you're hunting 10 acres off the edge of the lake.
Well, number one, your boat access. First off, if you're hunting something like that off a river or lake, use boat access, kayak, canoe, whatever you can. Number one. Number two, it's looking at kind of, let me think here. Last week's episode with Land Smathers, pretty late in the episode, he was talking specifically about looking at the property boundaries and the habitat diversity on the private versus the public. and figuring out like which one has the better food source versus which one has the better cover potentially for bedding. A lot of times on those rivers, you may not have great cover, and it might be hit or miss on food sources. So it's more like just a transition area that might set up okay during the rut if you have like a really good pinch, especially around like a slough head or something. But definitely, to me, my thought process, especially if it's a lot of broken up ground like that, is water access and then covering enough ground and trying to find what is on the private that would dictate movement and which parcel of public would they flow through the most based off what the private looks like, and look at it through that lens.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, expand the map. Don't just look at the piece of public. That's pretty much exactly what I was going to say. Also, I would say, you know, when it comes to rut hunting, you're going to want to really nail down on pinch points specifically. And if you have agriculture in the area, for instance, is that piece of public the strip of woods that's 100 yards long and a quarter mile wide, you know, run it up and down the river, and you got the river on one side and a private ag field on the other? Like, that's kind of a good pinch point. Like, look for things like that. And also, if I've learned one thing from all my buddies who hunt that stuff, it is you do not have to walk that far in. You can climb right there on the edge of the water and look into it, which is a really good way of hunting because it's so low impact. And you can just literally get out of your boat, pick a tree, climb up, and be good to go. Mm-hmm. So I would be looking for stuff like that specifically. But yeah, I would look at the private land and just find the best looking habitat that's in close proximity to public and try to learn how the public relates with that. I'd be curious for him to write back in and let us know like what he ends up finding. All right. Next up, we got Austin Bolton from Alabama. He said, could sound, as in non-human sound, affect a buck's bedding location? Is it possible after multiple days of rain causing the creek systems and drainages to give off moving/rushing sounds that it may shift the buck's bedding for the time being? So, I have no idea. So I reached out to Michael and Shane because they nerd out over this kind of stuff. And to my surprise, they said that they thought that it actually attracted the deer when they have like that noise cover or whatever. And Michael said that he felt like he specifically has seen deer in the past kind of gravitate towards that stuff where they're bedding next to like that really noisy creek. And I don't know, do you have any like opinion on this?
I can't remember if it was a podcast guest or a listener I talked to, but someone I talked to in the last couple of years was talking about specifically, I think it was a listener, a buck that he had jumped up a couple different times and he was actually bedded to his back up against an interstate and like the constant road noise. And he's like, there wasn't a lot of cover where he's bedded, but he's coming off that. It's on public and kind of dropping down into like a big drainage system, like a hub. And that's where he was getting on camera. And he kind of backtracked to that spot and jumped that buck up a couple times. And I remember talking to somebody else and like that constant noise where it's like again, a road where you're always going to have traffic, you're always going to have vehicles come through. It's almost like a drowning out effect. Like maybe that's one of those things that some deer, some personalities of bucks, they're going to bed up against it because, you know, more than likely the predator's not going to come from behind them. They have this constant kind of noise. And again, maybe they feel like they can slip through an area a little bit quieter because of that noise.
Yeah.
I've seen people talk about that with logging activity, like when they're cutting timber, thinning timber, like the bucks don't seem to be overly wary of that sound, especially when it's constant. It's one thing if it just happens for a few minutes. If it's going on all day long for a week or 2 weeks straight, the deer just get used to it. I mean, any kind of loud noise like that, like I don't think it's going to affect the deer. Now, the rain thing, I have no idea, like in that circumstance. I mean, to me, that's an interesting thought, and it's interesting that Michael and Shane, especially Michael, said specifically, like he seems like thinks that there's a slight attraction, like maybe the deer can go in there. He feels like he can be quiet, moving around, and maybe he's just trying to bed where he can visually see something. I don't know. Yeah,
that's an interesting take. I'm definitely going to think about that in future episodes and maybe ask that to future guests, like specifically guys who focus on buck bedding, and just notice if there's any kind of common theme there. So appreciate the question. Next up, we got Josh Duro. I think I pronounced your last name right. My apologies if I did not. From Alabama. He said, hey guys, love your show. I found y'all after listening to another podcast from the Midwest, but wanting something that was applicable for Southern hunting. Man, we're throwing some heat at the Midwesterners today. Let's go. Let's see. Quick search of Southern hunting led me to y'all. I think you guys had just started. Thanks for what y'all do, Andrew and Jacob. Awesome show. Great content. So my question is, have you guys heard of a quote-unquote split rut? I'm seeing a lot of folks talking about this specific to this year on a 19-year cycle correlating with the moon, which I read an article which suggests that this year In the Midwest, the mid-October peak breeding and then around Thanksgiving for peak breeding. Sounds like a more widespread first and second rut, but wanted to get your guys' take on it and know if there's any research backing this theory up. Thought it was interesting. Thanks. Have a blessed day. So what he's saying is, and I've seen this too online, there's people putting articles out and there's people talking on social media that the rut is going to be split in half this year. And the first half of it's going to be in October and the second half, like mid to late October, second half's going to be around Thanksgiving. I doubt it.
You've seen stuff on this? I've never even heard.
Really?
Yeah.
You haven't seen it? Really? People have been sharing it in all the groups.
No, I have not seen it.
Yeah, you don't get on those groups anymore, do you?
I do, but the thing is like, I want to know where the data, he's saying it's a 19-year cycle. I'd love to know, is that from observations of hunters or is that like some science?
I think it's, I wish I knew who like first put this out, but to me, without knowing who actually put it out, to me, it sounds like, just being honest here, someone who sells a moon calendar and like, I'm not saying that they're like misleading people or anything like that. I'm just saying that that they've probably got some formula that they think that this is what's going to happen, and so they're kind of pushing that.
Okay.
That's what I think it probably is. I've never seen anything that suggests that that the rut moves that much. Pretty much all the research that I've seen, and then also asking people like Bronson Strickland directly, other deer biologists that I know, asking them directly, the rut has to do with photo period. So it has to do with the amount of sunlight during each day. So as the days get shorter, that's what triggers the biological mechanism in a deer's head that causes the testosterone to rise in the bucks and does to come into their estrus cycle. So the moon doesn't really affect that. And there's two sides to this coin, because a lot of people think that the rut has to do with the moon and like the first full moon and whatever like triggers the rut. I don't really believe that. I know a lot of people who do. I mean, people have different opinions on it. I think what's more likely is the breeding dates happen at the same time every single year. Like the fawns are getting dropped, or the does are getting bred the same times every year. And people can go and actually prove that. You can go shoot does in the late season, go cut out the fetus and measure it and get a very, very accurate reading of when that fawn was conceived. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, it's been tested for, like I said, I've just seen a lot of research that says it happens at the same time every year. When it comes to the moon, I think what might be happening is if there is something to the moon cycle, it's probably just dictating whether or not you're seeing the deer doing the rutting. So, it's like they're always rutting like on November 8th every year in the Midwest. Like that's during the rut, they're doing their thing. But some years the moon falls where, they're more daylight active. Some days or some years the moon falls and they're just more nighttime active. So it gives you the perception that the rut has moved when they're still doing it. They're just doing it at night. I don't really believe that. I don't really think that the moon affects that. I think a lot of other things affect it. I think if the moon has an effect, it's a very small secondary effect that's hard to measure. So I might probably get some hate for that. But what's your opinion on this whole thing? Get the spotlight off me for a second.
I've got something. I don't
say it.
No, it's something to do with Michael Pike and his thoughts on dating.
Oh no!
Has to go around the moon.
Oh gosh!
Yeah, interesting conversation. That was like a year.
Michael's planning out what days he's going to the woods and what days he's going to the club.
And not the hunting club.
Not the hunting club. You're going downtown to Nana Funk's.
Yeah. Oh man, Tenerife. That's a funny. Oh my gosh, we ought to get Michael on here to do that segment because he told me about it. And actually, never mind. I'm not going to get into
it. Just stop right there. All right, let's talk about deer.
No, so, to me, that would be so wild if there's a cycle like this where a doe, if she was traditionally coming, again, talking like more traditional November, right? Down in the South, guys, we all know that, especially, Georgia's crazy with their rut. South Carolina's pretty wild. Alabama, Florida, Mississippi, Louisiana, all of them have certain regions of the state that will rut at different times. Mm-hmm. Like Georgia's got like Southeast Georgia, second week of October, they're rutting. And you go all the way up to like certain parts that's, late December, okay, and everything in between. So I don't know how that could actually work. I would love to know specifically more data points, if anything's ever been studied on that outside of observations. And maybe someone has looked at this specifically with like backdating fawns.
Yeah.
Okay. But the thing is, there's always going to be does coming to heat a little bit earlier, a little bit later than the whole, what's the right word? The whole pool of does. Like we found areas that we're hunting. There are does in there that are coming into heat probably 2 to 3 weeks earlier than
most of the other does in the area.
Majority of the other does, okay? And it's like you could find that probably in a lot of places. Like we had listeners, like after that second part 2 episode with Shane Parker and Michael Pike that came out maybe a little less than a month ago roughly. Shane was talking about, again, the whole thing about backdating does, backdating fawns.
Yeah.
And we had listeners write in like, dude, like one of the guys was like, man, I backdated a fawn, got photos of it very soon after it dropped, probably within a few days. And it was saying that fawn was conceived, it was like mid-October in a place that ruts that second week of November, typically.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, I know where I'm going to be, but it's kind of wild. You see that, like, again, random, just one doe came into heat way early and, buck bredder and the whole 9 yards. So that's something to kind of think about. It's like, I think there's always variability and it's based off the individual does. Like, yeah, they're the masses of those does in a certain area. They're going to be bred. The peak breeding is going to be a certain date range, okay?
Yeah.
But there's going to be does on the front half of that bell curve, week 2 weeks out, before that peak, that's going to be being bred, and the same thing on the back end of it. And I think that's something that people need to realize is like peak breeding is when majority of your deer are coming into heat and when the majority of them are going to be bred, your does. But again, there's other ones coming to heat before and after that. So that's why we've talked about in some areas that we've hunted specifically that, we've had good success on the front half of that peak bell curve and on the back half as well.
Yeah.
And it's just something to think about. So, y'all let us know if you're hunting somewhere, especially in the Midwest or a place that has like this November rut. See if you see any kind of rutting activity mid-October.
But do you buy it like that the ruts can be split in half this year? Like do you think that's going to happen, or do you think that's possible? I guess is what I'm asking.
I don't think it's necessarily possible. Like the peak breeding date, like half those does are being split now. I just think you're going to always have some does that are coming to heat way earlier and some way later than the others. So I'd be more interested specifically figuring out the data of why people are saying that. Like again, like what does if they're saying the whole moon is a factor for does to be bred or does to come into estrus, what's happening different this year than the last 18 years?
All right. This is from the Evening Tribune.
Oh, you found it?
I think so.
Is that a credible source?
The Evening Tribune, whitetail rut prediction for 2024, what to expect while deer hunting this fall. Drawing on 50 years of data, columnist Oak Duke observes the time when bucks are most active by chasing doe and how it correlates precisely with cyclic moon phases. Here's how 2024 looks. The dude's name is Oak Duke. That's a pretty legit name, I'm not going to lie.
Sounds like a pen name to me.
Yeah, right.
I don't
know. Let's see. I'm just kind of skimming through this. Using the rut phases to predict the rut, moon phases. The moon repeats itself, unfolding its phases exactly the same every 19 years. It's called the Metonic cycle. And on those years, the whitetail rut rolls out in a similar way as 19 years prior and not like the previous year. The rut, killed my... So... Yeah, he's making the case that because the moon phase is on like a 19-year cycle that it's entirely the moon phase affecting it. Yeah, I don't buy that. Look, I don't discount. So okay, scratch what I said earlier about a guy trying to sell a moon calendar. It seems like this is just a columnist, and this is like his opinion on his personal data. I can respect that. Yeah. Like if he's figured out some pattern in his area, cool. I don't think that's going to be widespread. I think that if you're, hunting your normal place this year, I don't think that you should like I'm not going to Kansas in mid-October now because of that article. Like we're still going later November, like trying to catch the back end of the rut. Mm-hmm. So anyways, I'll ask a biologist about that because we're going to have some biologists here in the very near future on the podcast. So I'm just going to ask them, get their opinion. Anyways, all right. Enough on the moon talk. Some people love it when we talk about the moon. Some people hate it.
Yeah. And again, it's a different conversation, not to get people all riled up even more about the moon. Difference between the moon causing does to come into estrus versus potential movement aspects at other points of the season. So that's a different conversation. We'll have a different day. We've had it in the past. We won't do it right now, but definitely something worth looking at, because when it comes to like the moon specifically, it is fascinating. And this is why I'm interested in Mississippi State now. They just put out a survey specifically trying to survey hunters on their thought process specifically to the moon, both phase and position, on if it has any effect on deer movement at all. Because they're going to look at that through some of the data from their GPS study of all those 60-plus bucks they had collared over the last couple of years. So I'm interested in seeing what that comes out with. But I know a lot in the past, again, some studies in the past by different universities have seen zero effect of deer movement when it comes to moon. And I think majority of the time it's always been moon phase, not moon position.
Yeah, well, that's the cool thing about specifically Mississippi State is we brought that up directly with the folks at Mississippi State, Bronson Strickland and the other guys, bringing up that exactly. Because even though, again, I'm not exactly a moon guy, but a lot of guys who I know and respect are. So I'm not gonna like just say that it's nothing. I don't plan my hunts based off of it. But the way that most deer research has tried to quantify the moon has not, it just hasn't been quite right according to like at least how people think of the moon nowadays. I was talking to Bronson the other day and I was like, when I was a kid, it was always moon phase. Like it was, it's a full moon. They're going to be up running around all night because there's light and they can see, it's going to be bad hunting for a couple days. It was only when I got older, really for me, just these last couple of years that I've started hearing about moon position and all the more overhead, underfoot, all that good stuff. And it's less of like, the deer just move on this moon phase. It's more of what time is the deer moving and is the deer getting up and leaving his bed half an hour earlier than he normally would because of moon phase. Like that's
moon position.
Or moon position. Yeah, see, I still say moon phase. It's burned into my head. So like that's when I say when I say if the moon has an effect, it's a much smaller, less dramatic effect. That's what I mean. Like I could buy that. Like, does it make him get up and move an extra 50 yards just subconsciously? I mean, I wouldn't be that surprised if they did research and they, used AI to, analyze millions of data points and they were like, oh yeah, it does look like that's happening. I wouldn't be surprised by that at all. I don't think that it's like this extreme thing where like deer are slaves to the moon, like some people would make it seem. So anyways, there's going to be some great research coming out because again, Mississippi State, they took our advice on that. They actually had me and Jacob helping with the questions on that survey.
Yeah. By the way, I don't know if you saw one of the comments that just came through on YouTube a couple of days ago. It was specifically to one of the clips from one of Bronson's episodes. And the guy was commenting about one of the questions we asked and there was no, like Bronson just at the time didn't have any information on it.
Oh yeah.
And he was like, man, what a question. Then he made another comment. He's like, y'all should have just been the ones running that study. And I'm like, I don't want nothing to do with it. Y'all, they take our thought process and opinions and try to see if there's anything, worth studying there. But yeah, I don't want to run no deer study myself.
Yeah, I think that's what they're looking at now. They're trying to specifically, because Bronson came to us and he was like, what would that's how the survey was designed. It's like, do you think the moon affects them like greater than 100 yards, less than 100 yards? Like put actual like distances on it of like what people's opinions are, and they're using that to go and look at the data and look at like they're trying to figure out what lens they should be looking at the data from, essentially. So anyways, because that's a very like public land, hunter kind of way of looking at it. I think
it's more private land.
No, I think it's more public land because private land guys aren't the ones like trying to get 100 yards from the bed.
No, how much earlier might you come out on the food plot?
I mean,
or a bait pot. I've heard a lot of the private land guys are the ones talking about it.
Maybe
like Rick Cope's one of those dudes. Comes to feed trees and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I feel like we've talked to quite a few that looking at it from that lens, like because if you look at a moon calendar, again, we're off in the rabbit hole now. When it talks about like the feed times, like the activity, like once like the high activity, low activity, all that kind of stuff. It's based on specific feed patterns. If you look at it, it's like feeding times, like what's the feeding window? Like the Outdoor Alabama app, it's got it on there. They have their own
that's true.
Little deer activity moon calendar thing that's on the app.
Oh yeah, I forgot. You used that a bunch last year.
Yeah, and seem to be. I don't know. Maybe I was just, maybe it's.
I don't know.
All in my
I
head.
remember you last year. It was like it was a hit or miss.
It was, but then again, I might not be in the right spot. I mean, if you're in the wrong spot, it don't matter what it says.
Yeah.
But then again, you could be the best spot in the world, and it says it's gonna be slow. But dude, if you're in the right spot, it's like those deer just might show up. They might be tight to you. So it doesn't really. To me, that's where it kind of comes back down to like, sometimes you could almost make it feel like you're just proving yourself right. Like if you hunt like a really, really good spot, it's like you could have, kind of subconsciously, oh man, it was all because of the moon. Like maybe you were just in the right spot at the right time.
Yeah,
it had nothing to do with it. So it like kind of comes back to
little confirmation bias.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Confirmation bias. So, but anyway, yeah, I pay attention to it. Shoot. If I see there's going to be like real good peak activity from like 7:30 to like 8:30 in the morning, boy, I'm
a little boosted confidence.
My phone's put up. Dude, listen.
Hey, if it gives you confidence. Hey, that could be the other thing. It's like, okay, so you got the peak activity time. That's when you're going to put up your phone. Had you been looking at your phone, you'd have them slip right by, buddy.
That's true. Just think how many times, I don't want to know, but how many times I've been like sitting in the saddle or tree stand, messing with my phone, texting somebody, looking at stupid reels on Facebook or Instagram, and then that big buck came by. I never knew he was there.
Like never even knew.
Never even knew
he came
there.
by.
Yeah,
he probably looked up. He's like, oh crap.
Or back in the day when I was sleeping, hunting out of a summit climber, and dude, I'd be passed out, dude, for like 2 or 3 hours. There was one I told the story before, dude.
You probably blew out that spot with how you snore.
Probably
wherever you did that,
dude. I went to sleep. Piece of public land, this little SMZ I got in, climbed up this tree, and dude, that second that sun hit me, it was like during bow season. I had my bow in my lap. I didn't even have a bow hanger or anything in college, and that sun hit me at like 7:30 in the morning.
It's over.
And dude, I went to sleep. I woke up. It was 11:30. And I was like, I woke up because like the sun, I was like baking, dude. I was cooking in the stand.
You're like sunburned.
And I was like, what? And I woke up like
freaking ginger.
I did not realize.
Getting sunburned in December.
Have you ever fall asleep someplace and you wake up, you don't know where you're at? That's what it was like. Dude, I woke up and I was like, where am I? And I'm like, oh my God, I looked at my watch, looked at my phone, and I was like, oh my God. I'm like, dude, there could have been a 190 walk by me. Yeah, probably not.
Not a chance.
Yeah, because of the snoring.
Yeah, it probably sounded like the dang wood booger over there. Some kind of monster up in the woods. All right, we got to move on. This is from John Williams from the great state of Texas, baby. The property I hunt is majority pastures with a few stands of planted pines that are about 30 years old. Lots of thick grown-up understory, but it's never been maintained or burned. We are surrounded by other blocks of bigger timber, and it seems the deer mostly pass through our property, but I have always struggled to pin down their patterns and bedding areas. One block I hunt has a deer lease on one side that was cut in 2017, and on the other side, there's a big landlocked piece of ground that no one uses. Super thick, nasty stuff, mostly mixed hardwoods. I always thought that that's where the big deer would be hiding because it is so thick that no one is in there that I know of, so it should have minimal hunting pressure. Listening to you guys talk about clear cuts now has me thinking that the deer might actually be bedding in the cut deer lease instead of the other side, which I do know they usually have some big deer on that lease. If I'm right that they are spending most of their time on one of these neighboring properties and passing through or coming to browse on ours, which edge would you put more focus on, the cut or the big thick timber? Also, any advice on what to look for to identify where they might be crossing? Seems like there are just trails everywhere. Thanks, guys. Love the podcast. All right, so that's an interesting situation right there. What are your initial thoughts on that? And then
He didn't describe what the thick timber looked like, did he?
I mean, just said it's a really, really thick, super thick, nasty stuff that's mixed hardwoods.
So probably just older regen, clear cut. Probably a bunch of sweet gum and crap in there too. To me, it depends on like that property line, like kind of between when you're talking about like both of those habitat types. I would probably the first thing is like if you're scouting that edge and working that edge between both habitat types. First off, are you seeing any? First off, is there any compounding features like coming in and out of one of those properties?
Yep.
Like whether it's a creek drainage, a ditch system, a big ridge that drops off, like where the clear cut is. There's a big ridge point that drops down into like a big bottom or like connects to another ridge system. Anything they can use for a path of travel, because if there's trails everywhere, I mean that's kind of common around clear cuts and stuff. It's like you got trails everywhere, but also connecting those habitat edges and like those terrain features to where are you finding congregation of buck sign. Specifically, I'd be looking for like scrapes, looking branches, and finding some rubs. Rubs are great, but like specifically like some of those scrapes, like a little focal point of where all those deer are dropping into or coming down to, and using that as a point of backtracking some deer. Like try to get them on camera on one of those scrapes, or if there's not a scrape, make a mock scrape, and then use that as a central point of like having deer come to. Like that's your quote unquote bait pile. That's what's attracting the deer, and then using your cameras potentially to backtrack from there. But to me, it kind of comes down to like how old is the clear cut? Is the clear cut 2 or 3 years old? Is it 7, 8 years old? To me, that's a factor. And then also, what does the understory look like in those thick woods? Because it sounds like, tell me if I'm incorrect here, but it sounds like both those properties, the clear cut property and the sounds like select cut or just the nasty thick woods, are not on his property, correct?
Yeah. He's in between them.
So,
and he feels like deer are passing through.
Oh my God, dude. Find a drainage. If there's a drainage that connects both of those properties or a thick, just whatever, it could be a Chinese privet coming from one side of the property to the other side of the property where they can run that edge going back and forth. That's where you're going to catch them.
Oh, yeah. All right. You stole my answer.
What? You should just answer first.
Well, I just read the whole thing, so I want to give you a chance to answer because I've been talking. No, I agree with that for sure. I would be looking for some kind of edge. You mentioned that your property is, it's got a few stands of planted pines that are about 30 years old, but it's also got pastures. I would be curious on where the stands on your property meet each other, so different pine stands, or if you have some overgrown pastures or any kind of thick cover, like any kind of edge diversity on your property in between those two properties would be nice. Or any kind of, like you said, Jacob, any kind of terrain feature, any low spot that might cut through your property. One thing, this kind of reminds me of a place that we hunted in South Alabama, the place that had the super crazy pressure last time we hunted there. And where we were hunting, where we ran into Old Scram that one time, was like this big block of thicker pines that they were kind of bedding in, but they were also walking around in it. And adjoining that was a stand of like actually thick hardwood timber, which is kind of rare around here. And I was hunting the edge of that. And what I was doing is I was running the edge of the thicker hardwoods and the thick pines, and there were scrapes running up and down that edge. And I then noticed that scrapes a lot of times would be on like the hilltops. So like the edge just ran straight through the woods. It was kind of like a property line. And it ran straight through the woods. So it would like go up a hill and down a hill and up a hill and down a hill. And the scrapes would be on the tops a lot of times. But when I actually hunted in there, almost every buck that I saw ended up coming down the drainages in between the scrapes. So my mind kind of immediately goes to those drainages. It's like, is there some edge you can run and find some scrapes, find some buck sign coming through, and then find maybe a low spot or just some kind of edge, again, that they can travel? That's just where my mind goes to. Compounding features. It sounds like a really good situation, honestly. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like a pretty awesome property.
He didn't say this, but I wonder how far each of those properties are from each other across his property. Like, is it 200 yards? Is it half a mile? Well, how does that lay out? Because if it's really wide, it's going to, like, if it's like, say, a quarter mile to a half mile in width, like his property between the two cover types, yeah, you could get a deer run straight line through there, but more than likely you're not going to have a good edge probably running that whole way. But if there's a tighter portion of his property where there's like almost like a corner of his property that kind of juts down, and then both those thick cover types are on each side of them, that's where you're probably going to find more crossings. So like just take that in consideration as well. Like if it's a super large landscape where you're at between the two properties, it's probably going to be harder to find specifically like an edge running it, unless there's like an old fence road. There's something there that could like add some diversity and add some cover going across. But more than likely, those ditches are going to be the biggest factor, especially if it's in some kind of hill country, like not real big steep hill country, but it's some elevation change. It just seems like those bucks specifically like to run those ditches and to go from one side to the next side and kind of stay low, not get all the way down the creek bottom, but kind of run these ditches across these ridges, so they can stay a little more hidden. Yeah, definitely. Also, by the way, if it's, he says it's majority pastures, but he's got stands of planted pines that are about 30 years old with grown-up understory, you might have more deer bedding on your place than you realize, especially if you have really good cover like that. And also, just for map scouting purposes and understanding the landscape as a whole, one thing I would do is, again, zoom out a little bit,
forget about the property lines and just look at the habitat. Like look at your neighbors, like literally just turn off the property line layer and just look at the satellite or hybrid image with topo lines of the whole place and look at what would your anchors be across that landscape, across the several square miles in that area. What would your anchors be like? What are going to hold your deer? Where are your best bedding areas? Where are your best feeding areas? And see if you can figure out some kind of cycle where, deer might go from point A to point B and then figure out where that, intersects with your property.
Well, one thing he's got going for him, maybe, depending on the cover and the habitat and the timber he's got on his property, is the clear-cut property probably doesn't have a lot of fee trees, a lot of oaks. In the thick pine or the thick timbered area, it may have some, but I would guess it sounds like it's an area that probably got select cut or cut in the past and just naturally regen is just thick understory going through there. There's probably a lot of woody stem cover. If he's got potential oaks that are going to drop close to that property line where those deer can slip off that for early season activity, that's something else to look at as well. So, definitely check that out. But again, any ditches, drainages running in and off those properties onto your property is going to be definitely probably the spot to really scout, maybe throw a camera out, look for scrapes in those locations just because that's going to be one of the best points for them to cross at and come onto your property.
Yeah, definitely. All right, next up, this is from Mark Fulcher from Texas. Does finding sheds in the off-season help hunt planning during hunting season based on the area the shed is found in, or does it just tell you that the deer survived the previous season? Love the show. Thanks, fellas. I'm going to say right off the bat, one particular episode pops into my mind for this, and it's episode 440, Big Woods Post-Rut Bruisers with Rocky Smith. I think it was just me on that episode, but I interviewed Rocky, who killed a huge buck. It was like a 13-point on some Big Woods, Alabama public land, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, that's how he found that buck, is he found that buck's shed. And I think Michael Perry's like this too. Like several guys, if they find a shed, they get really excited about it and they shed hunt pretty seriously, even here in the deep South. John Boy's like that too. Because if you find that deer shed, that's where he was wintering. That's where he spent, the end of fall. And so you're probably in his core area. So I know a lot of guys who are very confident in that. I've never really put a ton of stock in it. I don't know if I've actually ever killed a deer in a place where I found a shed.
No.
But the general area, I think it tells you that area is holding deer after the leaf drop happens. But anyways, what's your thoughts?
I was hoping you were going to talk for a second.
You trying to look something up?
I was going to pull up another episode.
So I'll say this, by the way. You're in Texas, so I don't know exactly what y'all's rut is like. But one interesting thing about the rut here in Alabama, and we were talking about this last year, is our rut happens so late, like December, January. It happens post leaf drop. And a lot of times where you find sheds are in those areas that have like the viney cover. It's got the woody cover that deer are going to try to retreat back into after all the leaves fall, because our big shift is after the leaves fall. A lot of those bedding areas suddenly get open, and so the deer get really concentrated in certain kinds of thickets. And there's one spot in particular in North Alabama that we've hunted a couple times where we find sheds in this one little area repeatedly. Like every time I go in there, I find sheds. And it's because these deer are just stacked up in there because of the habitat that time of year. Well, that habitat is pretty much, at the time they're shedding their antlers, that habitat's the same as when they're rutting too. So there's also a lot of buck sign. Like the deer just spend time in there in January and beyond, and they end up shedding their antlers later in the year. So in areas like that, at least where we hunt, I do kind of pay attention to it. And I wasn't able to make it up there and hunt last year, but you went in there and found a lot of sign and saw a buck.
Found 2 sheds too.
Yeah, and you found 2 sheds. That's what I'm saying. Like they spend time in there because it's got green cover, even way after leaf drop, late season. It's still got green briars and honeysuckles and stuff that they can eat, and it's still got cover that doesn't like die back with the winter that they can still hide in. So
a couple other episodes that to me kind of answer this in a really good light would be episode 335, which is finding mature bucks postseason and sheds with Nathan Killen and Rusty Johnson. Again, episode 335. Again, that's only on the audio platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, that kind of stuff. It's not on YouTube. That's a really good episode where both Nathan and Rusty, who live in completely different areas, Nathan's up in Virginia, Rusty's in Arkansas, they both use postseason scouting and shed hunting to find kind of these core areas for these mature bucks. Yeah, once season ends, but it still gives them like a good point of like, if he was here, where's the best early season activity, and actually trying to catch those deer on camera somewhere in that general area, summertime, and then also throughout the fall. And I know Rusty has a ton of success with that in Arkansas, like finding individual bucks. Another one who talked about this way more recently is episode 600 with Todd Stakely. He talked about specifically finding sheds of bucks kind of postseason scouting, and that's where he's trying to kill that buck during the season. Because it seems like down here, because of the habitat diversity, he's in Alabama, those deer aren't relocating super far distances, like kind of where they're at when they drop their sheds, which probably are dropping their sheds in a lot of places here, kind of that March time frame, late February, March. He's still finding those bucks again the following season in that general area. So to me, it really kind of sets up like how your property lays out with the habitat and covers like, and does it make sense for deer to be there all year, or is it truly just a late season bed food source area that they're spending time in? Because like I know guys like out in like Iowa specifically, where they find those sheds might not be where that buck's at, next September. Like there's a very good chance he relocated a bunch of like a long distance, multiple miles, if not maybe further than that.
Because he's got more scarce resources than we have down here.
Especially when it comes to cover and food sources. So, and their winters are harsher. So like that's cool, but it's like, doesn't mean that deer's still there. Versus I think in the South, if you find the sheds in the South, there's a very good chance that buck is still somewhere in that general area for his, a lot of his other home range. Kind of like this year, I went turkey hunting with Greg Mayhair on a piece of public that we deer hunt on, and we found a shed of a buck that I was thinking maybe we had trail camera photos of. Come to find out we don't have them on camera, and his shed was laying 30 yards from our camera.
Yeah.
Like directly in front of the camera. That camera had died well before the deer dropped his antlers. And he's going to be a really good deer this year. He was a great deer last year, and he's going to be a hammer this year. So, but it's just one of those things like that. I'm assuming that buck is staying somewhere in that general area, but it's the landscape's so big in a lot of those places. It's like, what's the chance you're going to get them on camera? Like, you really got to fine tune your very specific spots to try to figure out where can I catch a deer like that I don't have any data with, but he dropped his sheds here. How can I go about finding that deer?
Yeah, definitely. All right. Next up, this is from Jeff Grunagen. I think I got your name right, but maybe I didn't. From North Carolina.
Hey, hot tip real quick.
Yeah.
Something else. Can I get prepared for some of these last names? Uh-huh. And all the listeners out there, because I used to use this a bunch.
Okay.
There's a website called howtopronounce.com. And you can plug in a name or a word, and it'll have AI voices read it back to you in the correct pronunciation. Can't talk. And anyways, you get it perfect.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Hot tip. Hot tip right there. Hey, all you guys in sales, that's a hot tip.
Especially if you're about to call somebody, you're like, I don't know how to say their last name.
That's right.
Just stick it in there, and it'll tell you.
All right. Again, from North Carolina. He said, should I be sitting on a feed tree in the morning/evening or all day? We covered this on a couple different feed tree episodes, and a lot of the guys that we've talked feed trees with, especially lately, like Greg, Rick Cope, other guys like that, yes, all of the above. Morning, evening, midday even. Midday seems to actually be really good as well, according to some of the guys we've had on. I think Greg was talking a lot about midday.
Mid-morning, late
morning. And interestingly, it kind of ties in, I feel like, a little bit with some of the GPS studies that we did with Mississippi State University on those podcasts, because I believe that they, Bronson was saying that they had like an average of 4 beds a day, but it did seem like they were getting up and moving, like in that morning time frame in daylight. Mm-hmm. And one thing that I know we've talked about with Michael and just amongst ourselves too, is it kind of seems like these deer will go and they'll feed all night. And when it starts getting close to daylight, they'll go and lay down somewhere that they feel comfortable. And then at some point in the morning, they'll get up and they'll go to where they're going to spend like the rest of their day. And, a lot of guys who are big bed hunters, they've been saying that for years. And it seems like some of the GPS data is kind of bearing that out right now and proving that. And so I wonder if that's why those feed trees are really good, either early in the morning or mid-morning. It kind of depends on where you're at. But, you'll hear people... A lot of times you'll hear guys talk about, and at least I've heard a lot of times, in early season, someone will kill a buck at like 7 a.m., 8 a.m. He'll come in just, munching. Or they kill them like 11 a.m. They get that mid-morning. And so I kind of wonder if that's like that buck getting up and shifting into his day bed, quote unquote. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think some areas definitely set up better for, like, I think the midday movement on feed trees is associated very closely to good bedding cover. I think some of the guys who we've had on it talked about that. That's kind of like a commonality is like, Scott Seals, great example in Alabama. He's talking a lot about like 9 o'clock to noon, first week of bow season.
Yeah.
Because he's hunting these little tight little SMZs, these hardwood ranges in between pine thickets. A lot of times those bucks are going to get back up to, up out of their bed, come down their feed for a little bit, grab some water, and go back up. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's like you have a really good chance to kill one, midday, late morning, even early afternoon on a feed tree. And to me, it kind of comes down to like how close are you to cover? Like if you are super tight to bedding cover, it's like that's one of those spots that you probably are going to have to hunt it if you can all day long, just because so you don't bump deer if you got to get back out and you don't have the cleanest access. But also, it's like you never know when that buck could come through there. Versus if it's a spot where there's a destination food source, which we don't deal with this a lot, but outside of oaks, say there's a giant field, food plot, ag, something that's, maybe 400 or 500 yards away from like some of the best cover, but there's feed trees on the way back that these deer, these oaks that these bucks can hit on the way back going to bed. Well, that might be a really good morning spot, maybe a good afternoon spot. But to me, the afternoon spots, at least the commonality with some of our guests, not all of them, because Greg May here talked about specifically like some of his feed trees are 300-400 yards from cover, and he's still catching bucks in daylight feeding on those trees.
Yep.
But it seems like in the afternoon, the closer you can get to a feed tree closest to the bedding, the more success you're going to have. Like, who do we have on from Arkansas? Talked about that in the mountains. Kelsey Moss talked about that.
Yeah.
With his feed tree in the mountains, like those feed trees close to the tops, like those bucks are bedding like on the thick cover on the top of these little ridge points. And the closest feed trees he can get to, like that top, is more than likely where that buck's going to come out first in the afternoon. First in the morning, he's maybe easing back up to bed. You catch him a little bit further away from that cover.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is from the same Jeff from North Carolina. He said, in the early season, with the heat specifically, what is the best way to take care of a deer after getting them down? This is his second year in and a steep learning curve last season, but I've got a good feeling with the work I've been putting in. Hopefully multiple listener success stories to come. Thanks, guys. So when you kill a deer in the early season, this is especially relevant down here in the Deep South, where it's not uncommon for it to be 95 degrees on opening week. I mean, it's pretty cut and dried. I'll say you can get away with a little bit more than you'd think, but don't be like loosey-goosey about it. Meaning that, when you get that deer down and you kill the deer, the very first thing you should do is gut it, in my opinion, if you're not packing it out. A lot of times we'll pack our deer out, but even if we're not packing them out, I'll just walk. As soon as I walk up to the deer, I'm dragging it somewhere to gut it pretty much. You don't want to drag it all the way back to the truck, load it in the truck, drive 30 minutes to the nearest deer processor, and then have them gut it for you. Just get it gutted immediately. And if you've got like a long time period before you can take care of that deer, this is what I normally do. Let's say last year on opening day, great example. I killed a doe at like 9 a.m. on opening day. Drag her out, gut her. Don't break her down or anything in the field. Just get the guts out of her. Or wait, no, you broke that deer down. I'm thinking of a different deer. Sorry. I'm thinking of a different deer. Okay, get the guts out of the deer. I load it into the back of the truck, and I couldn't mess with the deer until later that night or the next morning, and it's hot. One thing that I'll do is I'll just go get a bunch of bags of ice, and I'll get like 2 bags of ice, and I'll shove one up in the chest cavity. I'll shove one kind of down where the inner loins are at. I'll shove another one in between the back hams, and then I'll get a towel and put it over the deer and wet it with a hose pipe, and then just pour ice over the entire thing and leave it like that. And I've kept deer good for a while like that. You have to
give us a time. Like, what are you talking about? You say a while.
Like a full day,
okay.
Like a full 24 hours. I've kept one fine like that and ate the thing and everything was good. No meat spoilage at all. You just have to get on it quick. And like I said, don't just drive around with it the whole time. Like I'm going, I'm going straight to the deer and getting the guts out of it. And then when I get out of the woods, I'm going straight to a gas station and getting a bunch of ice. Even if I have to drive, 30 minutes or so to get to a processor, I'll still go get ice and just throw ice on the thing. I mean, because a couple bags of ice, it'll cost you like $10 just to ensure that you have zero spoilage out of that deer. What do you have? Anything else?
Yeah, no, I got a different opinion. I think I'm going to kind of push back against you. I don't like the whole packing full of ice and let it sit there, especially if it's early season or really any point of the year, unless it's like we don't get enough cold weather. Like, you're not hanging deer in the South. You see guys in Michigan and Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin that will shoot a deer in November and it's 25 degrees and they just hang the deer. They gut it, hang it, and let it sit for a day or two, and then they break the deer down. You can't do that in the Southeast. It's not possible unless you killed a deer during these really cold fronts, and it lasts for like a day and a half, 2 days.
Yeah.
So my thought, especially for like early season, is when you kill it, there's two decisions you have to make. Number one, am I taking it to a processor or am I doing it myself? Because some people like to do it themselves. I've done my own deer in the past. Just because I didn't like the way a lot of processors process their deer until we met weavers, which do it very different from what I'm used to in the past in a good way. But it's breaking that deer down as fast as possible. Yes, you want to gut your deer, but where you're going to have the most meat spoilage is specifically around the large bones in the deer. The femurs and the legs, you're going to have bone spoilage around that. That bone holds so much heat and the muscle holds so much heat. You'll see this because I've seen this early season. When you go to shoot a deer, if that deer has laid for 2 hours and you go to cut the ham off and everything, if you were to butterfly that ham and split it open, you're going to start seeing like a slight coloring change on the ham up against the bone. And it's going to be like slightly like metallic color, kind of like got this little haze to it, and that's bone spoilage because it stays so hot. And it doesn't take super long for that to happen. It's not a lot of meat you're going to lose in that circumstance, but it's going to be some of the processor you're going to have to trim off in order to keep you from losing that. But where you're going to have the most spoilage is on the hams. You're going to have it a little bit on the back strap, specifically up against the rib cage and the backbone. And the worst two, other than the hams, is the inner loins, again, inside the gut cavity, then the neck, if you like neck meat. Now, typically, if you shoot a doe, especially early season, she's not going to have much meat on her neck. Like, I've tried to save meat off, even like a decent-sized doe, like a 90-pound, 100-pound doe, and there's just not a lot of meat on the neck anyways, compared to like a buck kind of later in the season. But like the inner loins, if I kill a deer early season, the first thing I'm trying to get out is the inner loins, if possible. Like, I'm trying to get that out, get ice on them as quick as possible, because those will go bad so fast. Like, it is unreal, like how hot that cavity is and how quickly they'll deteriorate. But again, if you're going to take it to processor, gut it, pack it full of ice, and get it there as quick as possible. To me, if you got to wait, if it's early season, it's in the 80s plus degree range, I would break that deer down. If you can't get to a processor within a few hours, I would break it down and put it on ice, put it in a cooler. Get you, even if it's a cheap like igloo cooler, go get you like a 7,500 quart igloo cooler for like $80. Stick in your truck, and when you're packing deer meat in there, just cut the hams off. Again, cut your hindquarters off, skin it, cut your hindquarters off, get your front shoulders off, back straps, inner loins. If there's neck meat, get the neck meat. Again, small does, pretty much there's not much there to grab. But pack it on ice, and when you pack it on ice, specifically, do not leave the drain plug in the cooler. You want the drain plug out of the cooler. You want to pack it full of ice, and you want to have that cooler propped up where the drain plug's aimed down so all the water can rush out, because you don't want your meat just sitting in a bath of ice water. It'll deteriorate the meat as well, and it has a weird flavor profile, texture, all that kind of stuff.
Makes it pale.
Yeah, it's not good.
Doesn't look good.
But how you keep that from happening is, again, you unplug your drain plug on your cooler, you prop the cooler up on the back side of it at the one end away from the drain plug, and you let all that water drain off in your truck. Again, if you're in an SUV, kind of tough to do that. You can't really do that unless you have a rack on the back of your truck or the back of your SUV. But like, you just don't want that meat sitting in ice water. But again, just try to get it processed as quick as possible. Like, if you're gonna bring it back to your house, stick it. You can leave it in the cooler. I have no issue leaving meat in a cooler for a couple days if I'm going to process it myself. Again, cooler's propped up so the water's all draining out, and packing it full of ice. That's perfectly fine. But if you're going to take it to processor, again, if you can't get there within a couple of hours, I would break it down and then take it to them on ice in the ice chest, and I promise you'll have a lot better quality meat than just letting it sit in your truck.
Yep.
So that's just my thought process.
No, I agree with that. That's definitely the better way to do it, for sure. Also, I would say, too, I'll use my Georgia buck from a couple years ago as an example. The one that I shot opening week in Georgia. I don't remember how hot it was, but it was very hot.
It was hot.
In that case, like, we're hunting a WMA, and we're kind of far out We dragged the deer out. It took a couple hours to recover the deer, getting everybody together, like with the cameras and everything. Got the deer. The track, we talked about it the other day. It was stressful, but it didn't take long, but it was stressful. Not much blood. But he only went like 75 yards. Got him out relatively quickly. And then at the front of the WMA, they had their little skin and post thing. One thing that I like to do, even if it's really, really hot outside, is, like you said, I was going to break him down immediately. And even if you have a cooler, but you don't have any ice yet, I like to cool that meat down before I put it in a cooler. Like maybe you have a big contractor bag, you're going to throw all the meat in, whatever the case may be, to keep it dry in the cooler. I like to keep game bags around, even if I'm not, like on that hunt, we're not packing deer out because you can't get more than like 200 yards from a road on that place. So we were going to drag our deer out, but I still brought game bags for this exact reason. When I hoisted that deer up and I started cutting him up, you take the hams, you take the back straps, and you put them in game bags, and you just hang them up in a tree in the shade. Even when it's, upper 80s, low 90s that day, I think is what it was. You hang it up in the shade and just get a slight breeze on it. It'll cool that meat down very quickly. Not get it cold. It's not like ice, but it'll just get the heat off of that meat. So when you throw it all in a contractor bag and then put it in a cooler and then you got to go drive to go get ice, that meat's not... You're not sitting a bunch of hot meat on itself, and it's going to insulate itself. Because the worst thing is, like, even when you get a cooler and you got ice and everything, you got like all that meat in some plastic bags or even in separate bags, but it's all sitting there against each other. The same thing you're talking about with the bone spoilage. Even when you put ice on top of it, the very center of all that meat, where there's no ice or anything, is insulated and it stays warm, and it'll stay warm for a long time.
Stay hot.
Yeah, it'll stay hot for a long time. So you need to, in my opinion, go get some game bags. You don't have to get real nice ones. I would recommend getting nice ones because you can use them over and over and over again. But get something like that where you can just hang that meat up in a tree and just that little bit of breeze and letting it hang there for a couple minutes. Like when you grab it, you'll be surprised at how cold it is.
Yeah.
So that's one thing I would recommend as well. Even if you're not packing your deer out, that's just something super, super handy to have around.
Yep. Also one other, this quick tip on that. When it comes to a cooler for deer meat, oversized is always better than just big enough.
Yeah,
Remember
definitely.
that when it comes to meat. You want as much ice on that meat as physically possible. Like, I've got a 65 quart cooler. If I bone out a deer and put it in there, it's just big enough for in ice. It's not big enough. Like, I need to get like a cheaper 100 quart cooler would be fantastic to have in the back of the truck. And if you're not using the cooler, like if you're on a hunting trip, you just pack gear in there. Like, use it as like a gear tote storage. But if you kill something, pull all that stuff out where you have plenty of space and you get 6-8 bags of ice on it. Just because, again, you want as much ice as physically possible to cool that meat down as quick as possible. Because if you just put all that meat in like that 65 quart cooler and it's boned out, it's in there, I can get probably 2, maybe 2.5 bags of ice in there. That's not enough. Like it doesn't cool it as quick as it was. If it was a bigger cooler, there was more space in, I can get the meat spread apart like in the different bags, and I can get way more ice on there, chill a lot faster. Like that will tremendously help you have higher quality meat by having an oversized cooler. Again, if you go to Walmart, get you an oversized 75 to 100 quart igloo cooler. Probably spend, I don't know what they are now, maybe $100, something like that for one of the cheaper ones, because I'm not looking at it for long-term storage. I just need something big enough to hold ice, to keep it cool, where I can get a bunch of ice on that deer as quick as possible.
Yeah, and by the way, like you're the one that taught me how to do that, and that dramatically changed. It made it so much easier to keep really high-quality meat for an extended period of time when you just can't. Either you don't have the time to process it yourself, or you don't have time to get to a processor. Especially Weavers for us is 2 hours from where we live, and it's worth the drive to go up there. But I can't just like drop everything and just drive up there when I shoot a deer. Like it usually takes me a couple days to free myself up and go. And the cooler thing, I've struggled with coolers in the past about, you put ice in there and then you got to drain it. The whole thing of packing it, leaving the drain plug open and tilting it up. I mean, I wish that I knew the exact amount of time, but we have kept meat like that for 8+ days.
Oh yeah, I've
before.
done it over
Easy.
a week. Easy.
Yeah, I mean 8+ days, no problem.
Well, and
just keep putting ice in it.
Well, when I used to process my own deer meat, I would do it for a week plus in that same circumstance and have it propped open and again the drain plug open and just let it drain, and it'll do really, really good, especially if you don't have the storage like in an extra refrigerator to put all the meat in, because most people don't have a second refrigerator. Maybe they got an old beer fridge down in the garage or something, which can work out great, hanging quarters. And you did that one time, I think, at when you were at school in Auburn. You had
Yeah.
a whole quarter just sitting in your freezer.
I dry
or in the
aged it
refrigerator.
for 21 days.
Yeah.
I flipped it every like 2 or 3 days,
Yeah.
and then we smoked it for 24
pretty
hours.
good.
Yeah,
Pretty good.
It was good.
But yeah, that's I'm very passionate about the whole meat preservation aspect and taking the utmost care of it because again, it's just a better end product here and get on the way back. So yeah, oversized cooler, tons of ice, get it chilled as quick as possible. Also, one other thing, just because we're on this little rant and I'm passionate about it, if you're going to hold it for an extended period of time, I like to completely debone the meat.
Yeah.
I don't want the ham. I don't want that femur in the actual quarter itself. Same thing with the shanks. I cut the shanks, cut the meat off the shanks. Unless you're going to want to keep them whole to potentially cook, but you can cook them without the bone on there. And it cools off even faster because again, that bone, the femur bone specifically, will hold so much heat. It is unreal. Like it is unreal. So if you can get that out too, if you're going to hold it for, especially if you're going to hold it for like a day plus, it'll help cool the meat down a lot quicker.
Yeah, and just look up how to debone. Like if you haven't done it before, look up how to debone a back ham on a deer. It takes 2 seconds.
That video, I just got to fix it.
Yeah.
It's be ready to roll.
Okay. Yeah.
We got a video on YouTube. We've been holding on for a year now almost.
Yeah.
That will drop. That will be probably one of the most extensive breakdowns for deboning a deer because I think that was deboned. It wasn't. I remember it was quartered. Was it quartered or deboned? I can't remember.
I don't remember. I think we quartered it.
We'll do another one because we were supposed to do another one of caping a buck out. And ended up the one buck I thought I was going to mount and ended up deciding not to mount the thing. So we do a video on it, but like we'll do that again this year as well, kind of showcasing how you do all this stuff in the field. But
anyway. That'll be so. Yeah, it's very very easy to do, and you can fillet off all of the meat on the entire back ham in one piece, so you don't have to break it down.
I had to show Andrew that, Mister. He was cutting it up into chunks.
Yeah, cutting out the sirloin.
It's so easy to do it with one knife swipe and just take the whole ham off one piece. It's so much nicer.
All right, moving on. This is from Preston Calvert from Alabama. He said, just curious what oaks typically drop first, seeing a few whites dropping, but the chestnut oaks are dropping pretty good even with it being dry. So that's chestnut oaks.
Where's he from?
Alabama.
He don't say what part of Alabama, does he?
No.
I already know which oaks he's talking about then.
He's talking about mountain oaks.
Oh, God bless them. Yep.
Yeah. They drop way early. I wouldn't be surprised at all if they're dropping right now. They're probably just now starting, here late August, dropping. I mean, typically your white oaks are going to drop first, and your red oaks are going to be a little bit after that. But also, it kind of depends on your area because I've been in areas where, something random kind of oak drops earlier. Like it could be an individual tree, it could be a whole ridge of trees. Like I think a lot can impact that from how dry it is outside, storms that you've had coming through, probably soil quality can affect that as well. But generally speaking, your white oaks are going to be first, and then your other oaks are going to follow.
Which a water chestnut, or not water chestnut. Water chestnut is something, or swamp chestnut oak. Those are something that's highly sought after by deer in certain areas of the country. We don't really have many where we're at because again, we don't hunt a lot of like river bottoms. But the mountain chestnut oaks, the ones that I'm pretty certain this guy's talking about, there are times when deer will eat them, but it's very much, at least in our experiences, when there's literally nothing else mass for them to eat. Like if it's a really bad year for white oaks and red oaks, they'll eat them. Or if it's really early in the season, which Alabama doesn't open up really early enough to really take advantage of that. But like when we were in Georgia, it was the first thing dropping the second week of September.
Yeah.
And the deer were feeding on them in certain areas, but they weren't feeding on them in masses.
Yeah.
So it's just
they
something.
were opportunistically feeding on them.
Just taking advantage when they could. But it's just, at least in a lot of our areas, those mountain chestnuts will get people in a rut of not seeing deer because I used to do that. I'd find big ridge tops full of mountain chestnut oaks, acorns everywhere. I'm like, dude, this is the best spot ever.
You break your ankle on them.
Yeah, and there'd be no deer sign, but I'd sit there for like 2 days and never see a deer because they just weren't eating those things. But some areas, it's kind of funny. You're talking about like what species typically drop. A lot of times, again, mostly it's going to be your white oaks. I've heard in certain circumstances, like you said, red oaks dropping a little bit earlier. But also, it's weird when we have people on because we don't typically see it, but there's some areas that do, where water oaks are dropping early. Typically, in a lot of the places that we hunt, water oaks are typically dropping like that December. Sometimes you get one holding into January, but a lot of times it's like November, December they start dropping. A really small oak. But we've got one on the farm I just thought about. at Anthony's farm, and it drops almost like every single year because he loves hunting that tree in October. It'll be like right around bow season, it starts dropping in raining acorns, and he's killed a handful of deer and bucks off that tree. So it's like you said, and it's in a low ditch, has a lot of moisture there, and for whatever reason, it drops a little bit earlier than some of the other ones on the property. So, but definitely your white oak species are gonna typically probably drop first.
Yeah, and I'll say if like all the folks out there listening right now, if you live in a state where you're getting ready to open up for early bow season, like first or second week of September, right now is the time that you need to be going out and checking feed trees, because right now you might find some that are already dropping. You can definitely find where storms have blown out acorns out of certain trees, and that'll tell you which ones produced, and sometimes the deer will already be feeding on those as well. But now is a really good time to go out there and start figuring out where those trees are at, because the thing about feed trees is like, it's not something that you really, I mean, I guess you can go quote unquote postseason scout them or scout them in the summertime, but it's really it's an opportunistic thing because this tree might be hot for like 3 or 4 days. Like it's dropping, the deer are really hammering it, and then it's gone. You know, they've eaten everything underneath it, or they've moved on to a different tree. So you got to really stay on top of it. So specifically Scott Seals, when we interviewed him, I guess it was last year on feed trees. Can you look up that episode number real quick? When we interviewed him, that was his tactic. He didn't really start scouting them until he got pretty close to deer season. And then he's hitting it, and he's going out there, and he's looking for them. He's trying to find where the sign is, find where the deer are hanging out, and just keying in on those feed trees. So, but yeah, typically it's going to be your white oaks, but that is not necessarily the gospel, because we've had really good hunts over red oaks in early season too. I mean, it's what the deer are telling you. Most of the time it's going to be a white oak, but not every time.
Yeah. By the way, this is one of the first episodes on YouTube, video podcast wise. It's episode 486, Mastering Hill Country Feed Trees with Scott Seals. Again, episode 486. It's on YouTube. It's on all the audio platforms. You can go check it out.
Okay. This is from Brody Travis from Georgia. I recently started scouting a small management area of about X acres that is a hilly terrain bordering a lake. Nothing but oaks. No thick bedding cover. So far, I've jumped about 15 does, which is good for me, 8 and an 8-point while scouting. It seems like every deer is bedded on a military crest with a rock outcropping to their back. They have a clear sight advantage and spook about 80 to 100 yards out. Would you try to hunt this area during bow season? And if so, how would you approach it? I'm debating if waiting until gun season and trying a spot and stock would be better approach, since the deer allow me to get close enough for a rifle shot before getting off their beds.
Well, that's with leaf on.
Yeah. Oh, that's
when leaf,
exactly my thoughts.
If your rifle season, what state he said he's in?
Georgia.
Their rifle season opens earlier. But if your rifle season didn't open in like Alabama, like late November, there's still some leaves on the trees, but some of them are starting to fall.
Yep.
They're going to spook even further distance if there's less leaf cover.
So and they've had a month of pressure plus.
Yeah. So my thought process is definitely I would try to go bow hunt it, but I would go, and he said he's already been scouting. If he's been marking all these specific rock outcroppings, and that's the commonality of where they're bedding at, like it seems like they're bedding kind of up in elevation up on some of those hills, rock outcroppings to their back, and then they're probably dropping off the feed. Just mark all those on the map where you find them, and then figure out at the bottom of that ridge where's some of the best feed trees. If it's all oaks, it's going to be kind of hit or miss, but I'm sure you could find something there of a feed tree and or scrape that's getting some activity use and be able to kind of time it and hunt it effectively. And to be honest, that actually sets up pretty good for an afternoon hunt. Like morning hunt, it'd be kind of tough unless you could come in from the top maybe and kind of coming around the back side of one of those ridges, because they're probably going to fan out and kind of be feeding all over the place. But in the afternoon, they're going to be up there on one of those bedding, one of those rock outcroppings bedding. So this is like paying attention to that and trying to find feed trees that 100 to 150 yards away that has the most sign on it and hunt that specifically.
Yeah, Brody, I don't know if you're going in from a boat or not. You mentioned that there's water nearby in a lake. And if you can actually go in off a boat, I've not done this, so I'm giving you advice on something I have not done. But this is something I've wanted to do for a while. I just haven't got to try it yet. And that is, if you can come in via boat and these deer are kind of bedding up on the hills, this is the perfect time of year, going back to what we said in the last question. If you got a little John boat, go get the bass rod and go out there and just go up in some of those sloughs that you're interested in hunting, and just kind of sit there, cut the motor off, troll around, maybe fish a little bit, and listen and see if you can hear any oaks dropping up in there. That's going to be the easiest way for you to locate feed trees, and that is like zero impact scouting right there. You can go and sit up in that slough and literally just sit there for 10, 15, 20 minutes and just listen, and you'll hear the acorns dropping, hitting the leaves, and then you're like, okay, got a feed tree right here, potential feed tree. Doesn't mean that they're eating on it, but it tells you there's an oak dropping right there, and that's something you can do right now that would be perfect because y'all's season is getting pretty close to opening up. If you can't do that, I would do the same approach by walking in. Again, go scout, stop, listen. You're going to hear the mast falling out of the trees, hitting limbs, hitting the leaves, hitting rocks, and that's going to give you an idea where those feed trees are. I would not try to hunt beds. I wouldn't try to hunt around the outcroppings. I would definitely try to hunt the feed trees down, lower. And one thing that we've seen in GPS data, by the way, around these lakes is those slough heads are great. They're a natural pinch point. They're a natural kind of flow area. There's usually some nice oaks down there. And, man, we've seen it several times in some of the GPS data that we had access to where those deer, man, they are going down to those slough heads like every single night.
Another good place to find scrapes. By the way, also, if you're using Onyx, make sure you're using that acorn-producing oak layer and be able to kind of pinpoint where you could find white oak specifically in areas that it makes sense based off knowing where some of those rock outcroppings are and where the deer are probably going to drop down, especially if there's like a small little drainage or ditch running up to one of those rock outcroppings. And oak trees that are kind of white oaks are on the way down, lower in elevation, and using that to your advantage for like spot checking areas where you're not going all the way up in there bumping the deer up, but you're able to check within 200 yards of them on some of these white oaks and seeing if there's any sign, if you're finding whip rubs, if you're finding any kind of feed sign, and then setting up accordingly on that.
Yep, definitely. All right, we're going to get through a couple more here. This is Richard Shahan. Man, you should have told me about that app earlier.
Howtopronounce.com.
Howtopronounce.com.
Not a sponsor.
Not a sponsor. All right. He's from Georgia. I'm tapping into your ballistic nerd here. I am taking my 12-year-old son on a pig hunt. We'll be shooting a 6.5 Creedmoor, where we will be going has the potential to produce large hogs. We have already sighted in his rifle using Hornady ELDX bullets. I'm a little worried that at close distances of it overexpanding and not getting a pass-through. I've been looking into some more controlled expansion bullets like Federal Terminal Ascents. I was also looking into some all-copper options. What bullets do you guys suggest? Thanks for your help. And by the way, go big orange. Just time for football season. All right. I don't have a lot to add here. I'm not like a big ballistics guy. I like the Hornady ELDX, but just I haven't shot a pig with one yet. Jacob, what's your opinion?
You need to be shooting a monolithic bullet, which is just the fancy word of saying like all copper bullet. Either the Hornady, I had it pulled up, the Hornady GMX or the Barnes TTSX. Both of those are really well-respected monolithic bullets that perform really well because they're going to give you way more penetration, but also specifically it's going to open up and it's going to have a huge wound channel. And it doesn't matter if you shoot the animal at 5 feet or 150 yards, like it's going to open, it's going to be able to pass through that animal. So especially if you're going to shoot hogs, especially something over 150 pounds, a 200-pound pig or bigger, that's what I'd be shooting, especially in a 6.5 Creedmoor. Like I would want the most penetration possible with a big wound channel, and do it that way. Especially if you shot, whether you shoot them in the head, it doesn't really matter, but if you shoot them in the shoulder or something like that, I would want as much penetration as possible. So again, it opens up, you can look at, there's a ton of YouTube videos out there of guys shooting them, and also like looking up videos from both of those brands of the terminal performance, but that's what I would shoot. I shoot a monolithic bullet specifically for that application.
Okay. All right. This question is from Bart, and he didn't give his last name. He's from Alabama. How often do you guys do predator hunts on your sections of quote-unquote privileged land, if at all? And if you do you correlate that with the fawn drops, or is it based on other contributing factors? And he said he hunts in Bibb County, Alabama. Your family farm is in Bibb County, Alabama. Mm-hmm. So little neighbor action over here. I haven't done any kind of any kind of predator hunting at all on my hunting club. There are guys on my club who trap right now. They've been trying to get me to help them out, but like I don't have time right now.
Well, you about to.
I'm about anyways. Yeah, I've trapped in the past, and I never correlate. I was trapping in the winter because I was trying to get some nice pelts and stuff. I wasn't necessarily like back then. I didn't understand like timing it with a fawn drop and all that, and I just wanted a nice pelt. So I've never tried that before. The guys that do it on my club though, they do it pretty intensively around when the turkey poults are like when hens are going to nest for turkeys, and then also for deer when the fawn drop happens. And I've talked to a lot of different guys who suggest that's the way to do it. Alan Summerford, Adam Keith, and Matt Dye from Land and Legacy, several other biologists that we've talked to are land managers. That's what they all suggest, because the thing about coyotes is if you can go out today and I can kill 5 coyotes on our property, and within a couple months we're going to have 5 more move right back in, and you just can't kill all of them. So it's best if you're going to put that effort in, if you're trying to get that effect, whether it be predator hunting or trapping, do it when the fawns are hitting the ground. So they're out doing it right now. What have y'all done it on your family farm? I know Anthony's trapped out there.
Yeah, Anthony's trapped, but it's just more so around his convenience. I mean, he's done it because spring, summer is when he's busy with work.
Oh yeah.
So it's like a super hard time for him to like check traps and everything. He hasn't done it in a couple of years now, but actually I lied. He trapped, I think 4 coyotes last year, 2 years ago. He got 3 of them mounted. One was nice. A black coyote.
Oh yeah.
Because you've seen those mounts he's had. But yeah, I mean, everybody that talks about it, it seems like they've had the best success specifically trying to target it right before the fawn drop, not during the fawn drop. Like say like around here, a lot of the fawns are hitting the ground probably this month, like August timeframe.
Yeah. Like
July, August. You know, other areas of the country, you have earlier rut, might be June or May. But whenever that is, you know, weeks, a week or 2 leading up is when you're trying to take out as many coyotes as possible. And I want to do more predator hunting. I used to do it a good bit in the past, and it's always fun to do, especially using coyote howlers, like not actually doing distress calls, but just howling because they're so territorial, and like they just want to come check it out. It's pretty fun. And using like a diaphragm howler, like you can howl on a mouth call, like a diaphragm turkey call. It's pretty sweet. But yeah, it's just one of those things. I could see it being extremely effective. But also the thing is how much property you have to work. If you get 50 acres or 100 acres, it's fun to do, but like in all honesty, how effective could you be on that property compared to like, if you had a few 100 acres and you could do a lot more over bigger landscapes, or if you could get your neighbors on board as well, and whether you go shoot them on your neighbor's property or hunt them on your neighbor's property, trap them on your neighbor's property or whatever, because it really needs to be like a pretty intense effort around that time frame. Like just killing 1 or 2, that's cool, but like you really need to try to stack the bodies, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like we know guys that do a lot of nighttime like thermal hunting for coyotes and pigs and everything, and if they can get 1 or 2, that's great, but if they can get 5 or 6, that's pretty awesome.
Even better.
Yeah.
This year we haven't done any trapping. It's busy. It's hard to get out there and do it. It takes time. And if I was going to do it for the fawn drop, and I was doing it for management purposes, I would lean more towards trapping, and the predator hunting would be fun. Don't get me wrong. I would like to do it, but I don't know if you're just going to be able to make as much of an impact as you would be with trapping over an extended period of time, say like a month or so. I think though, this coming spring, we've talked a little bit about it, possibly actually helping those guys out at the club, throwing some more money in for more traps. I think they're only running like maybe a dozen on 1,800 acres. And you could run a lot more than that on our club. And you just put them, at road intersections, places that you can drive by, because you got to check them every day. And just, once a day, go out there, make your rounds, go drive. You could put cell cams on all of them too, by the way. That's another way.
Sounds like an expensive endeavor.
Yeah, it would be.
It'd be cool content to see how the coyotes react to them when you don't catch them.
Yeah, that's true.
It'll tell you what's wrong with the set.
Yeah, that's definitely true. But the reason I got more interested is like I don't feel like we're really hurting on deer, just to be completely honest. Like I feel like our deer population's fine, but the turkeys, we've got good turkey hunting, but I have not seen a poult. I have not seen a poult this whole spring, summer. I asked Cody, he hadn't seen one. And the reason I'm concerned about it is I've gotten a bunch of pictures and videos of hen turkeys walking around, groups of hen turkeys walking around in our club, and none of them have had a poult, not a single one. The root cause is the habitat is not that great on our club. We don't have great nesting habitat. So, and it's exasperated by the coyotes. Like the poults don't have a place to hide. I can't manage the habitat on the club. I can manage the predators. So this coming spring, we're talking about maybe all getting together and really trying to crack down. Because if you have a really, really bad hatch and your poults get wiped out, then in 2 years you're going to have a really crappy turkey season. Mm-hmm. So that's got us all concerned. So we might take that up in the future. But anyways, I think we got time for like maybe one more or two more. All right. This one is from, where is it? Seth Matherin from Louisiana. He said, it's now been a full season since your episode with Rick Cope. Did y'all find any success with turpentine and maybe combining that with a killing wind? And what about the rut with calling or rattling? I never got my hands on any turpentine.
Neither did I.
I tried to find it, and I did not find any. Mike did get some, and he used it all last year, and he did end up killing a bug. So.
Yeah, we get some anecdotal evidence from some listeners who now swear by it. After hearing that episode, they went out and started implementing it, and I mean, absolutely swear by it. Like,
yes.
It straight, it worked. Kind of goes back to the whole sin episode we just did about a month or two ago with Tom Brownlee. Whatever gives you confidence, do it. I'm not opposed to it. I may try it this year, specifically when we're hunting more of the pine areas, and just I don't think it's going to hurt the situation.
No.
So just see how it goes. But definitely, we've had some listeners write in that swear by it now after using it. So we didn't do that. I killed both my bucks last year, calling, rattling, and grunting in Alabama. First one I killed, kind of answering that part of the question. Grunted in a buck, killed him out of this one tree. Next day, went back to the same spot, did the same grunting sequence, like 10 grunts that Richard Frott talks about in episode 290, calling deer the right way. Not on YouTube. It's on Apple Podcast, Spotify. And called in another buck, but he didn't come all the way out for me to see exactly what it was. All I could see was his brisket and his legs, and he stopped about 5 yards shorter than I needed him to. He was still like 15 yards from me, but this is the trail he came down. He'd have to be at like 10 yards or less for me to truly see him get a shot. And then earlier in the year, that was in November, earlier in the year, in October, I rattled in a buck off the ground. That's the first buck I've ever killed rattling. And he came in within 5 minutes, right at the last bit of legal light, rattled him in down in the creek bottom, super windy conditions. Had walked about a mile and a half, 2 miles in a little loop, kind of hunting through an area, setting up multiple different times, calling, and ended up within 5 minutes, less than 5 minutes of me calling, rattling. He came down off the ridge point, thrashed a tree in front of me, made a scrape, and I shot him at 25 yards. So
beautiful.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because both deer I shot last year, one was with a muzzleloader, one was a rifle. Either one of those were well within bow range because one was about at 8 yards. The one I shot with a rifle came down that trail when I grunted, and then the one I rattled, he came in 25 yards, shot him with a muzzleloader.
Yep.
So, but yeah.
All right. I think I would love to try the turpentine thing. I didn't get my hands on any last year. Again, it's not like the turpentine you go get at Home Depot. It's pure gum spirits turpentine that like Rick gets it from a pharmacy, and that's where Mike got his from, and a lot of listeners too. There is one on Amazon that says it's pure gum spirits, and we can link that in the show notes that you can go order. I haven't tried it yet, but I did have a bunch of listeners write in, and that's the one that they actually ended up getting, and they said it seemed legit. So I'll probably order some of that before this year just because I'm curious. I'd like to try it. I kind of like the smell of pine too.
Well, Rick Cope's episode, that's 512 or 510?
510.
Okay, so episode 510, it's on YouTube and all audio platforms. Go listen to that episode. Go watch that episode again. That's where he was the first guy we've talked to that really brought up the whole turpentine aspect. Yeah. And he got from his mentor, Sonny, who I think's in his late 80s, who was doing this back in like the 70s and 80s. You know, killing a bunch of deer with a bow. So they're from South Carolina. But anyway, but what about calling? Any success or any thoughts on calling?
I didn't. I called a good bit last year, but I still haven't nailed down the whole grunting sequence thing. I just haven't. I haven't had a ton of success with it yet. I'm the exact opposite of Jacob. The bucks I killed last year, I killed one of them just on a bed to food pattern on opening day. I killed two just sitting in a funnel on during the rut. and I didn't call any of those deer in. The first deer I shot in Arkansas, the bigger one, I was calling a bunch that day, and I'd kind of given up because I'd called a bunch. I was calling every like 15 minutes for several hours, and just hadn't seen anything at all. And I eventually just kind of decided to sit there and relax because I felt like I was maybe moving too much, or I should just pay attention more, like to my surroundings, and just kind of be low key. And then I ended up killing him. But yeah, I don't think I grunted in anything last year. I had some encounters with some bucks that came by me, grunting and fighting and ticking antlers and stuff. I tried to call to them, didn't work. So I don't know. I'm doing something wrong.
See, called in 2 bucks on the SOA hunt. Called in 1 buck I shot. Called in all grunting. Called in another buck, the one I didn't shoot. I'm trying to think whichever ones I called in. I called in a handful last year. It's all about confidence, bro. You got to know what you're doing.
Apparently,
you got to fake it till you make it.
I know.
Hey, I'll tell you one thing. I saw some video. It was a reel. That dude was joking around about rattling, and I wish I had the two sheds in here to do it. But like Richard Fott talks a lot about the rattling aspect, and it's not the pop pop, like you're not smacking them together like that. Like it's just like grinding and popping, where it's going back and forth popping. And it was an Instagram reel, and the guy's like just sitting there. He's like pop 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 pop, just smacking them together. I'm busting my knuckle just doing that, and just smacking them together. I'm like. It sounded like he was chopping wood. That's what it sounded like.
Yep.
It's like that's not what you're trying to do. That's what Richard talked about. Like what a lot of people do wrong is they start smacking the antlers, and that's not what you're trying to do because the bucks aren't smacking antlers like just ramming back and forth. They're locking and then they're grinding back and forth, popping antlers.
Yep.
So this is something to take into consideration. Again, I'd go back and re-listen to the episode 290, and kind of get you a game plan as you go into the fall if you're going to implement calling, both grunting and then also rattling.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to be calling a lot in Kansas this year. Specifically rattling.
I'm calling in Alabama.
I'm calling in Alabama too, but I'm more excited about calling in Kansas. All right. Last question. This is from Brian Jackson from Louisiana. He said, when is the chocolate, gray, brown, earth tone patch coming back in stock? Thanks. We're getting a brand new shipment of hats within the next 2 weeks. So y'all be watching out for those on the website. Once again, our newsletter is going to get the first dibs on that. We're going to blast it out to the newsletter that all the new merch is in. These hoodies will be included in that. So these hoodies, and then we're going to have a restock on all hats. Jacob's wearing that shirt. Of course, we have those, and we're going to have another shirt design as well that drops in that. So there's going to be a bunch of gear in the next 2 weeks. So to make sure you do not miss that, go subscribe to the Woodsman Wire on our website. You can go down to the link below and check that out. It's completely free. It's just a newsletter. So yeah, go check it out, and we'll let y'all know when those drop. Jacob, you got anything before we wrap it up? You're about to kick things off.
Yeah. No, I mean, not really. Just excited. Season's about to be here. Kyle Sides is very upset that we can't go dove hunt at his place. So just heads up on that.
Yep.
I had a long conversation with him about it.
Oh, no.
No, he's like, dude, I can't believe y'all are leaving me. And I'm like, he don't have his 2 best shooters there. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Cody was he texted me today. He's like, hey, y'all making it to my dove shoot? I was like, no, we're gonna be out of town. Yep. Sorry. Which it's unlike us to miss opening day of dove season, but we wanted to do this road trip, trying to interview all these people before deer seasons got real hot and heavy. Because the deeper we get into September and October, the more difficult it's going to be to line up all these schedules, multiple people. And if we go and record all these podcasts and we get a bunch in the bank, that gives us a little bit more time to go hunt when our season opens up.
That's true. Very true. So, well, other than that, just appreciate everybody that's already been buying apparel, and some of you guys have already been buying some of the new shirts. So appreciate all that support. Appreciate everybody that's been sharing the podcast, both the video version and the audio version. Y'all are a huge help. It's cool to see the growth of the show and seeing some of the engagement from you guys, especially leaving YouTube comments on Spotify, or also reviews on Apple Podcasts. So appreciate y'all just getting tuned into the show, and hopefully this might be y'all's best season ever. That's kind of what we're hoping for everybody. It's like, you're taking stuff you're applying from the show, you're going out there, and hopefully you're going to have one of your best seasons ever, and you're applying what you're learning from some of the guests on the podcast. So again, appreciate y'all watching the podcast, appreciate you listening to the podcast, and we'll catch you back here on the next episode of the Southern Outdoorsman Podcast. And remember, guys, y'all stay Southern.